My name is Gary Curtis, and I've lived in Waterloo, Iowa, for as long as I can remember. It's the kind of place where the winters come down hard and mean, where the wind doesn't just bite, it sinks its teeth in and holds. The air gets so cold it feels like breathing in glass, and the snow, when it comes, doesn't drift down softly like in Christmas cards. It piles up in jagged heaps, turning gray and crusted with ice, choking the streets until the whole town looks like a graveyard of forgotten things. Nothing stays buried for long in a place like this, though. Not secrets, not sins, and sure as hell not the things people wish they could forget. I've known Howie Davies most of our lives. He was one of those kids who always looked younger than he was, the kind people instinctively wanted to coddle and protect. He skipped a grade, but anyone looking at him would have thought he skipped 5. Small, slight, with big trusting eyes and a frame so delicate you'd swear a strong wind could snap him in half. People saw him as harmless, like some fragile little thing that needed sheltering. Maybe that's why nobody ever taught him how to see danger for himself. We weren't really friends at first. I was 2 years older, and that's a lifetime when you're a kid. But I fell back a grade, and Howie leapt forward, and somewhere in between, we collided. I was the one who got in fights, the one who always had scuffed knuckles and dirt under my nails. Howie was the one who never got sent to the principal's office, the one teachers beamed at like he was some kind of miracle. He was smart, no doubt about that, but not in ways that could actually protect him. He could tell you the difference between granite and basalt, could name 100 different stars in the sky, but he couldn't recognize a predator when it was staring him dead in the face. And predators were always watching. By the time we hit high school, I knew exactly what I was. I knew I wasn't like the other guys in town, the ones who only ever looked at girls. I knew that I had to keep my head down, stay quiet, move carefully. I knew that people like me either got real good at pretending or real good at running. Howie, though. Howie didn't seem to realize there was anything to hide. He was the type who could stand too close to another boy, smile too long, and never notice the way people's eyes lingered, the way their expressions shifted. Maybe that's why I stuck close. Maybe that's why I started looking out for him, even when he didn't ask me to. Because the world is full of men who see softness and mistake it for weakness. Full of men who smile with teeth, who hide hunger behind kindness. And Howie? He never learned how to spot a wolf before it was too late. After high school, I got a good job at a fried chicken fast food restaurant in town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was new, state-of-the-art, the kind of place that felt fresh and clean, not like some grease-stained hole where everything smelled like old oil. And it paid well, a lot better than busting my ass on a farm or choking on factory smoke for 16 hours a day. I actually liked it. The work was fast. The people were a mixed bag. Women, people of color, kids still in school, old guys who couldn't lift heavy shit anymore. People like me. It was the kind of job for people who didn't quite fit anywhere else. And I liked almost everything about it. Except John. John was a manager, and everybody loved him. People said he had a golden touch, that he could turn a dead-end shift into a good time. Charismatic, likable, the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the most important person in the room when he was talking to you. He was married to Lynn, sweet, kind, the boss's daughter, and they had a brand new baby, with another on the way if the rumors were true. A man with a family, a future, a reputation. But I knew the meaning behind his eyes. It was in the way he looked at me, in the way his gaze lingered just a second too long, in the way his lips curled up when I passed by, like we were in on some secret together. It didn't matter how much he loved his wife, how proud he was of his kid. There was something in him, something hidden, but not quite buried. Every time he invited me to his rec room for a beer, every time he nudged me about grabbing dinner after a JC's meeting, I felt it, the weight of it, the hunger. But I held my own, kept my distance, dodged his invitations with a smile, stayed polite, never gave him an opening. And it worked, until Howie decided he wanted a job. He graduated a year early, right before Christmas, and by the end of January, he was restless. Stuck at home with his parents, doing chores, wasting time. He hated it. He'd rather freeze his ass off walking around town all night than sit at home another hour. I should have told him no. I should have made up an excuse. Should have warned him off. Should have done anything other than let that sick, sinking feeling settle into my gut like a stone. But I didn't know how to say it without sounding crazy, without making it seem like I was just being possessive. So, I let it happen. Howie started on a Tuesday. It took John 5 minutes to notice him. I'd been dreading it, watching from the grill station as Howie stepped inside, still bundled up from the cold, his cheeks pink from the wind. He had that usual bounce in his step, the kind that made him seem even younger than he was. I saw John clock him immediately, his expression unreadable at first, just a flicker of interest. But then Lynn was there too, standing by the register, touching her stomach, failing to hide what everyone already knew. John didn't make a move that night, but I saw him watching, and when the next schedule came out, my stomach knotted up. The first 2 days we weren't working the same shifts. I told myself it was fine, that nothing would happen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was pulling tight beneath my ribs. So I stayed. I had no reason to be there. I wasn't working. I had no excuse. But I sat across the street in my car, watching the restaurant glow against the dark, steam curling up into the frozen air from the exhaust fans. I waited. John was there the whole time, standing too close to Howie, laughing too easily, his hand brushing against Howie's back when he passed by. And Howie, too naive to know any better, laughed right along with him. I kept waiting for Lynn to show up, for that safety net to snap back into place, but she never came. The customers trickled out, the employees left one by one, and by the time Howie and John stepped outside together, the night was quiet. I saw them standing by John's car, talking, their breath curling in the cold air. Then Howie smiled, his real smile, the kind that meant he was actually happy. He nodded enthusiastically, and I saw it before I even heard the words. John had invited him over. I bolted from my car, crossing the lot before Howie could get inside. "Hey," I called, forcing a smile as I approached. "What's going on?" Howie lit up when he saw me. "John's got this awesome rec room at his place. He's got a pool table, a jukebox, all kinds of stuff. You should come too." I didn't look at John right away. I could feel him though. Feel the tension in his posture, the way his easygoing charm had slipped just a fraction. I turned to him, meeting his eyes. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. If looks could kill, I'd have been dead. I swallowed hard and turned back to Howie. "You can't go." Howie frowned. "What? Why not?" I scrambled for something, anything. "Your dad, he's sick. Your mom called me earlier. She wants you home right away." Howie blinked. "What?" "He was fine this morning." John's gaze flicked toward Howie's dark house as we pulled up. "Funny," he murmured, voice quiet but razor sharp. "Lights are all off." I didn't answer. John and I locked eyes, and for the first time, I knew he saw me the way I saw him. Not as co-workers, not as anything close to equals, but as someone who knows. And Howie, standing between us, had no idea how hard I was trying to protect him. Howie agreed, albeit reluctantly, to avoid John outside of work. He didn't understand why I was so adamant, but I couldn't explain it properly without sounding like I was trying to control him. So, he nodded, trusting me, even though his eyes were filled with confusion. He promised, but that didn't stop John from trying to lure him in. At first, it was subtle, a quick glance here, a casual touch there. Nothing overt, just enough to leave a bad taste in my mouth. Then it escalated. John started making crude gestures and giving suggestive looks whenever he knew only I could see. His eyes would linger too long, then he'd laugh like it was a joke, like I should be in on it. But I wasn't laughing. I watched from a distance, my skin prickling every time he made one of those gestures. I knew what he was doing. He was taunting me, testing my limits, trying to provoke some reaction. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing me squirm, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. But eventually, it started to fade. John lost interest, or at least, He pretended to. I don't know if it was because of the summer approaching or if he had moved on to a new target, but things at work started to feel normal again. For the first time in weeks, I felt a bit relieved. As the days grew longer, I spent more time with Howie. We worked our shifts, but outside of the restaurant, we'd meet up after hours. Slowly, without either of us realizing it, we became inseparable. We were practically a couple, though we hadn't labeled it, and I refused to let things go any further physically. I wasn't ready to cross that line, even though every part of me wanted to. Howie was becoming someone different, someone bolder, more confident, and every day that passed, I found myself falling for him, all over again. One night, Howie suggested we drive out to a secluded forest preserve just east of town. It was a known meeting spot for men like us, quiet, hidden away, far from prying eyes. The radio played a mix of Elvis songs, which Howie loved far too much, but I humored him. The car's interior was warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. We sat in silence for a while. Howie shifted in his seat, glancing at me. His eyes were darker now, more intense. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken desire hanging thick in the air. Howie said, his voice trembling slightly. I've been thinking about this a lot. I didn't need him to finish the sentence. I knew what he was about to say. Howie leaned closer, his breath catching. Gary, can we? For the first time, I felt something break inside me. His eyes were pleading with me, and though I tried to hold back, tried to resist, I couldn't. Slowly, hesitantly, I let myself kiss him. It was soft at first, just a gentle meeting of lips. But then it deepened, and I found myself pulling him closer, my hands moving against the smooth fabric of his shirt. We embraced, and for a moment I forgot about everything else, the worries, the dangers, the fear. All that existed was Howie and me, finally letting ourselves be together. That was when the light hit. A flash of bright white light flooded the car, blinding me. My heart stopped. My first thought was that it was the police. Maybe someone had seen us. Maybe the world was about to crash down. But when the light lowered, I froze. It wasn't the police. It was John. At first, Howie seemed completely at ease, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. He didn't see it, didn't sense the danger creeping in like I did. His voice was steady as he looked at me, still half smiling, as if John's presence was nothing more than a friendly checkup. It's fine, Gary. It's probably just John being John. He didn't realize. He didn't know what I saw, what I felt, when I saw John standing there with that unnatural stillness, that unnatural gaze. But Howie trusted him still. Too much. John circled around the car, stepping softly in the snow. His boots crunched with each step, but there was an eerie silence to it. It was as if the world had paused, waiting. Howie watched him, relaxed, almost leaning back in his seat. He reached for the door handle to unlock it, probably thinking John just wanted a word. I couldn't breathe. Stop, Howie, I hissed, panic swelling in my chest. I grabbed his arm, holding it back just as he was about to unlock the door. The sudden movement startled him, but he didn't understand. Not yet. What's the matter, Gary? Howie frowned, confused by the sudden outburst. But his confusion didn't matter. My heart pounded in my throat. The door handle rattled against my grip. Something in my gut screamed at me to stop this, to get out, to leave before it was too late. Before I could say anything else, John was on my side of the car. I watched his face through the window, his eyes wide, fixated on me. Without warning, he tried my door. The handle turned, and to my shock, the lock clicked. It unlocked. I could barely move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked from the car. My mind screamed at me to stop it, to do anything, but it was already too late. Howie's eyes widened as he looked over at me, finally registering the panic in my face. I could see it in his eyes, the moment he realized something was wrong. His hand, which had hovered so innocently over the door handle, dropped to his side. Then, John's face shifted. The friendly, almost affectionate expression he'd worn earlier faded, replaced by something darker, something predatory. His eyes narrowed, a cold glint flashing in the light. Before I could even react, he lunged at me. His fingers reached for me, and the suddenness of it took my breath away. My body went into overdrive. I couldn't think. I couldn't process it fast enough. "Go!" I screamed. Howie's foot slammed on the gas, the tires squealing as the car jerked forward, peeling out of the snow. We shot forward, and I felt the car lurch violently, my hands gripping the door handle, my entire body jerking with the movement. But even as we sped away, even as the distance between us grew, I felt it. I felt the faint brush of John's fingers on my neck, his skin, cold and unrelenting, grazing my skin. The door slammed shut. Howie didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His face was pale, his hands still gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He was shaken, deeply shaken. His breath was shallow, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared ahead, as if afraid to look back. Howie never returned to work after that night, not even to collect his last paycheck. John's refusal to release it, even when Howie's father threatened to involve the police, spoke volumes. That paycheck became a symbol of something much darker. It wasn't just money. It was a power play, a threat. As for me, I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe it was because back then, guys like us didn't have the luxury of running away from things. We couldn't escape it, even when everything screamed that we should. Maybe it was because we were used to feeling powerless. Men like John held all the cards. We were lucky to be allowed in the game. I don't think he was really too attracted in me. Not anymore anyway. The fear, it never really went away. The days after that night in the woods felt like I was walking on a tightrope. Every step was cautious. Every sound around me amplified. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. But I stayed close to Howie. He needed me. Maybe I needed him too. It wasn't until the summer that Howie left for college, and the weight of everything hit me all at once. Howie was gone. There was nothing to distract me from the gnawing fear that still gripped me, the constant anxiety in the pit of my stomach. He was miles away now, and I was alone. But months later, news came. John had been arrested. The police had caught him, finally, for the things he'd done to another boy. My relief was almost physical, but it wasn't instant. For days, I didn't know what to feel. There was no immediate joy, no sense of justice served. I'd spent too long thinking of John as some dark, looming presence that I couldn't shake. The trial dragged on, but I followed it as closely as I could, as though the courtroom was the only place where I might find closure. When John was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the sinking feeling in my stomach finally disappeared. It was like a pressure had been lifted, and for the first time in months, I was able to breathe. I thought about Lynn, John's wife, and their children. What would they do now? I felt a pang of sympathy for them, but it was fleeting. Life had a strange way of moving on, no matter how many lives were left shattered in its wake. Howie came back after graduation, and things seemed almost normal again. He'd settled into a simpler life, one that I hadn't expected him to choose. College hadn't been what he'd imagined, but he was content. He was happy with what he had, and I could see it in the way he carried himself, in the way he looked at me. One night years later, as we sat together on the couch, Howie turned to me and said something that put my heart at ease. This life, it's exactly what I wanted. I believed him. So life went on. 12 years passed. Life moved in strange ways, faster than I could have imagined. The world outside seemed to change faster than I could keep up. But some things stayed the same. Howie and I together. Our simple life, surrounded by the memories of what we'd survived. Then, in December 1978, I came home with a Christmas tree, eager to decorate it with Howie. I set it up in our living room, the smell of fresh pine filling the air. But when I turned on the television, everything stopped. It was the news, a breaking story. John was being arrested again. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. How could this be happening? After everything, how was he still causing harm? When Howie came home later, he already knew. I heard it on the radio, he said, his voice steady, though his eyes were guarded. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to watch the news. We never spoke of that night in the woods, not aloud. It lingered in the space between us, silent but heavy. We'd survived it, survived him, but the memory, the terror, would always be there. Somewhere in the quiet of our home, amidst the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights, we both understood. Life could have turned out so differently for us. But somehow, we made it. We were here. We were together. And maybe that was all we could ask for.